Hey there YouTube, I'm Ikitsu, this is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel, welcome to a little bit of Age of Wonders Planetfall. So today we're going to be talking about a pretty fun combination here, the Syndicate Celestians. And honestly speaking, I think this is actually just one of those secret techs that's a lot of fun, even if I don't necessarily think it's the strongest out there. So I would highly recommend playing this particular secret tech. It's just really interesting. I think it's also one of the more well-balanced ones. There's a couple out there that are like really, really strong. Like I think Synthesis is probably stronger. I think that the Heriter is also a lot stronger, but this one's a little bit weaker, but I think a little bit more interesting than some of those. Although Synthesis is still kind of my favorite there. But yeah, in any event, let's start jumping straight into some technology stuff here. So first of all, this one does run into that problem of not being the best in terms of like production. Again, your big production bonus is coming from Syndicate at Indentured Servitude, and this is really late into the game. If you actually get this rolling, it's fantastic, but by the time you do get this going, it's so late into the game that you're kind of suffering from the fact that you've probably skipped a whole bunch of other techs, or just that it's a super, super late game. I do think, however, that this is one of the more interesting factions to have that, because you do have access to Harmonious Existence. Now, the problem is that this is actually fairly expensive and fairly late game for how weak it is. Plus 100 to relations with those groups in your starting factions doesn't matter at all at this difficulty level. It might matter more if you're trying to do diplomatic things in an easier difficulty, and I have even gotten alliances in this difficulty, but it's definitely not the most useful, especially because plus 100 to relations isn't really that high. What makes this interesting is that it does give you access to that plus 6 to happiness, which does counteract the bonus, or sorry, the penalty from indentured servitude. In addition to that, disincentive prayers. You're not going to be, by the time you get this, worrying about marauders. You should have enough defenses around your cities, and you should have cleared out enough of the marauder camps that you're not going to be worried about disincentive prayers. Missionary negotiators, again, this is still useful, and I think that if you're going to take it, this is one of the factions that would benefit from it to a certain extent there, because having a reduction in cost of your stuff that you're buying from dwelling shops, that's actually not that bad. You just put this in there, you buy all those items, and then you just get rid of this thing again. But honestly speaking, I think that you want to be saving up for the Ascended Teachers, because they made those units a little bit too powerful. So you're probably not going to bother getting Missionary Negotiators. If you wanted to get access to those abilities from your NPC camps there, honestly speaking, you will probably want something like this, because you need to squeeze out every last little bit of influence that you can get for those Ascended Teachers. So if there's something that you need to buy from the dwellings, then reducing the cost of it is obviously going to be something that you're going to want to do. So it can be useful in that sort of sense there. Again, I'm not the sort of player that uses clandestine practices, partly because diplomacy doesn't really work in this difficulty, and also because Cloak and Dagger doesn't really help me succeed at a covert operations in this difficulty. Everything just says this is too high a defense for you to use your operations on, no matter what the hell I do. So more to do with the difficulty than the actual strategy. Next up, you got access to Celestial Judgment. You're probably going to use this, just even though it's not very strong there. Plus 10% damage against virtually everything. It's not great, but it'll work. And then Karmic Amplification. This is actually really quite decent for Syndicate, because Syndicate does start off with that extra influence, and you can also take that starting technology that makes it so that your influence is worth a little bit more. So it's possible to get a ton of early game influence through Karmic Amplification, Syndicate, and some of that other stuff there, and use that for a really big early game push. So that is a strategy that you can sort of work towards. Do I personally think that it's an amazing bonus, Karmic Amplification? Not really, because it spawns a bunch of quests and you have to be doing those instead of doing other things, and sometimes you really want to be doing those other things instead, so it's not the best one out there. And because you're lacking in any sort of early game really strong bonuses to your economy, you're kind of going to have to be relying on sort of either your later game, your natural economy, or your military units just winning sort of very lopsided fights there. So anyhow, let's move over to that military tab here. Now, first of all, we've got our sort of typical units, and these ones actually have got quite a lot of shifts to them. So first of all, you got the Lightbringers here, and the Lightbringer for the Syndicate has access to Bone Crusher Dash. If we take a look at the Vanguard version of it, for example, actually they also have something different. Who has the basic one here? I think actually practically everybody has a unique version of this. Okay, so I think the default one is Meteor Dash, and it just gives you access to that stagger. It's got Soul Burn, pretty powerful effect there, gives them a lot of movement. The Syndicate version adds Cripple, which is at a very low strength chance, which is the reason that this is not very strong. Cripple basically makes it so that your target suffers from minus 30% accuracy and reduced movement speed. They're slowed. This is a really weak effect because there's guaranteed to be an enemy within range of the person who used the target of Bone Crusher Dash, and because of that, they don't necessarily have to move that far to be able to shoot. It does mean that they will lose a shot if they've got multi-shots and they're trying to step back away from the Lightbringer and then fire, or if they've got something that requires the full 3 pips to fire, they won't be able to move back if they're next to a Lightbringer, but that usually is the case anyway, because they'll usually get to do an attack of opportunity on someone who tries to back away from them, and they'll probably stagger them and stop them from moving backwards to begin with. So I do think that Cripple is not necessarily the strongest status effect there. Like, for example, I think that the Vanguard version, the Assault Dash here, which gives them the shield for 2 turns, that's actually really, really good because it lets them get into a really risky situation and still be safe. The Devar version here, the Burning Meteor Dash, it gives you an 8 strength chance to apply Burning, which is a pretty decent effect, and it's much more likely to proc there. Kiriko, I think, have a regular, but they've got access to both Frenzy and the Swarm Shield, so they can do some interesting stuff with that. So ultimately, even though that Cripple is added to these guys, I view them basically the same way I would view completely vanilla Lightbringers, which apparently only Assembly have. Actually, yes, even Assembly have interesting things, because they have Assimilate on their Lightbringers. So yeah, realistically speaking, these guys probably have got the worst Lightbringers out of all of them, but it's still a pretty good unit. I do think that, like, if Cripple were strength 8 chance of applying, it would probably be more competitive than some of the other ones, but as it is, they're probably the worst one. Even with that, though, it's a tough unit. It's got a lot of potential damage to them. They've got the ability to apply that Soul Burn effect, which is a little bit harder to apply in the early game. I think they're a pretty good unit. In terms of what you can add to them from the Syndicate side of things, the Psytech Vision Enhancers for 2 extra shields is pretty good. The unfortunate thing is that accuracy is not really that vital for this type of unit there, but it is pretty good just to get a cheap sort of bonus to armor there, or shields rather. Arc Retaliation Defense is actually a really good one. These guys are going to be in the middle of some danger there, so being able to stun a bunch of things, really, really a powerful effect on them. In addition, you're unfortunately going to be forced to get Tenets of Tranquility for these guys, unless you're doing sort of the smarter thing. So if I was playing a normal game and I wasn't doing it for this particular sort of walkthrough here, what I would do is I'd go into Vanguard and I would get the Interlocking Armor, and I would apply Interlocking Armor to these guys, because that's a stronger effect than the Tenets of Tranquility. I think it's a much, much better mod. And in this case, I've even got the option to go like into the Amazon sort of thing here, and I could add the Grounding Harness if I was worried about, if I was against a lot of synthesis or something like that. So ultimately, like, I think that you're not going to have to take the Tenets of Tranquility that often, just because there are so many factions that do have access to stagger-resistant equipment. But if for some reason you don't have one of the factions that has stagger resistance in their tech tree, and there are a couple, if you just can't get that, then you'll probably end up having to get the Tenets of Tranquility, which is a real shame because it's really, really weak. Added into these guys. It is very important for your melee units, though, to have access to some stagger resistance. Next up is the Shield of Remorse here. Oh, right, we're talking units, not that. What am I thinking? Next up, we got the Star Guide. And the Syndicate version of the Star Guide is actually really, really good. Instead of Blinding Light, they've got Deceiving Light. This adds Hallucinate at Troll Strength Trance in that same sort of area there. And this is a really powerful type of status effect that you can apply, and it's at a very high chance. Troll Strength chance to apply is pretty good. It also does have that sort of plus 10% damage to non-enlightened units from Celestial Judgment, and it's also enlightened, so this can actually stack up to be an okay amount of damage. The base damage is so low that's never going to be fantastic, but Deceiving Light is actually a really, really good debuff. Way better than Blinding Light, in my opinion. Celestial Guidance is a pretty okay buff, but it's even better for these guys because they're capable of stacking that with some of those psionic equipment buffs that you're able to get from that tech tree. Cleansing Light, same sort of thing there. Light Bolt, there's nothing really that special about Light Burn, honestly. You would want to lead with it, especially if you're going to go ahead and take the Mantra of Clarity. If you take this, Not only are you capable of soul burning a target, but that target is now 20% easier to hit with those follow-up attacks from other enlightened units, making it easier for those other enlightened units to hit. So this is a really good synergistic combination. This is why the Star Guides are so powerful if you've got access to inherent psionic tech tree. So yeah, Cleansing Light becomes more powerful, Celestial Guidance becomes more powerful, Deceiving Light becomes more powerful, and Light Bolt all become more powerful. And Deceiving Light is already more powerful for this faction than it is for like any other faction. I don't know of any other faction where I would say that they've got a better Star Guide than the Syndicate. Personally speaking, that's just my opinion of that, I think. Like Regenerative Light here instead of Healing Light, I don't think that's actually better. I think it's kind of the same, actually. These guys have a completely bog standard one, so I'd say that Syndicate's probably got basically the best Star Guide out there. Yeah, it's just a really, really powerful unit with those sort of combinations there. You're going to want to use these guys really hardcore, dedicated to support, but you've got that choice between going for like support with your enhancing your own units, or using them to disable the enemy units, or you can even make them so that they're good at both, but you can't do both at the same time because pushing them forward is always a little bit risky. So just a really good unit though. Anyhow, further down the line here, we got the True Ascendancy for those Ascended Teachers. Again, you get this through a weird sort of system there, so we'll have to go through this thing. So Ascended Teachers, again, they've got access to this Radiant Blast here. Again, a very, very powerful psionic ability. Similar sort of effects if we were to talk about this compared to the Star Guide's basic attack there. So this thing has all those sort of effects there, but just higher damage. Compelling Presence to mind affect something. This one's actually kind of interesting because if it fails, you're probably going to kill someone. It's actually quite a high amount of damage. Celestial Wrath, this is actually ridiculously powerful. It on the face of it looks like it's quite weak just because it says that strength 10 there, but if you look at the Enlightened ability at the end there, plus 5 damage for each Enlightened unit in battle stacks up to 5 times. So realistically, this is doing 35 damage, which is really, really high. Not only that, it's got that Enlightened trait to it and Celestial Judgment, so you can add plus 30% to that without any equipment. Makes this thing ridiculously, ridiculously powerful. Now, it's so good that I often don't find there's a great reason for me to upgrade these guys' damage too much, but you definitely can. They've got some psionic buff debuff sort of effects here. Celestial Radiance is also really powerful, of course, so you're going to want to make use of that. But these guys don't need to have tons of, like, they don't need to switch out their element necessarily, because they've got so many other things to do if they're stuck in a situation where they can't just deal damage to stuff, like if they're up against a lot of mechanical units that are highly resistant to their psionic attacks there. I don't think that they really suffer too much in those situations, because in those cases you can just use your Compelling Presence. It's only a single action. It's not like you can move up to those units and then use it. You can use your Celestial Wrath to just wipe out everything, even if they're resistant, because it's so high damage. You can use your Celestial Radiance instead there. So these guys have got options. Very, very powerful unit, and I do quite like them in this particular instance, spamming them out there. So that's your sort of standard units there. Let's talk about the text there, or the equipment. Again, Tenet of Tranquility. This is good for certain fringe things, because it does add Enlighten to your units, as well as stagger resistance. So if you're not talking about the Lightbringer or any other inherently enlightened units, you're looking at something like, say, your Enforcer, or your Guild Assassin, your Mirage, or anything like that. If you want any of those to be stagger resistant, and you don't want to give them another type of effect, this is actually quite good, because it's not only stagger resistance, but it's also plus 200 to morale, and it's also, I believe, it gives you that access to dealing extra damage to soul burn units. 20% I think is what it was. So it does give you those extra bonuses, assuming that you need that sort of stagger resistance and you don't want something else. Now, the big reason that I think it's pretty bad is because almost every situation I find myself in, I would rather have the Shield of Remorse instead, because the Shield of Remorse is a much more powerful sort of defensive tool in a lot of situations there. I do think that the stacking effect from Shield of Remorse there does make it so that a lot of units are going to fumble their attacks and makes so they can't attack you. And that, because of that, it's just a really sort of decent sort of debuff effect there. And this also applies that sort of Enlightened. You can't stack Enlightened. You're only getting the 200 morale once. So every time you sort of get another Celestial upgrade, you're sort of paying for the effect without getting the full effect there. Next up, you get access to 10s of healing. I think that since you're going to be building Star Guides and you are going to be building Ascended Teachers, and you might even be building Overseers, you don't need the Tenets of Healing as badly for this faction because you'll probably have a lot of healing anyway, but it does synergize nicely if you really wanted to go deep in that with things like the Mantra of Clarity and things like the Mantra of Life. So if you wanted to get those, you could put all three of those on one unit there, the Mantra of Healing, the Mantra of I can't remember, Mantra of Clarity, as well as the Tenet of Healing. You could do that. That is something that could work. I don't think it's really necessary, and there's no unit that I think really needs all that sort of supportability. Next up, you get access to Tenets of Pacifism. This one, again, I think that it's just hard to find good uses for this thing. There's very few instances where I find this is a good option. I'm sure that it's actually pretty strong in some instances or some cases, but I haven't found a good way to play around with that thing. Oftentimes, I'd rather just have an effect that can instantly, can kill a lot of units, or I would rather use the Deceiving Light or something like that. There's just a lot of effects that I think are a bit stronger. Lastly, you get access to Shield of Reckoning, and this can be quite strong. There's some interesting things you can do with this that would be pretty powerful. I didn't personally go with that particular type of build, but it is actually something that can mesh in a funny sort of way there if you're playing very aggressively and using the Arc Retaliation defense. Like going for the combination of Arc Retaliation defense and the Repercussion here, or Shield of Reckoning, as well as going for, like, say, the Tenet of Healing. And you would want the Tenet of Healing in this particular case, that you could heal yourself for a decent amount. Just run in there and make sure enemies are wrecking themselves on your face. That would be actually pretty effective with that type of build there. I don't necessarily think it would be that good, but it would be kind of okay. For other effects other than the Psionic Tree, which you could potentially go down the whole one, I don't actually think that this is an aggressive enough faction that you would want to take the Aether Storm, and I still don't really think I'm that comfortable to recommending the Mantra of Control there. You've already got Mind Effect, you've already got the ability to mind control people through the Ascended Teachers, so you don't really need Dominion of Command. So you're probably actually just looking at getting to Dominion of Vitality and then stopping. But other than that, you're also going to want to probably pick up the Psi-Tech Vision Enhancers, just because that's a pretty powerful sort of all-arounder, and the Arc Retaliation Defense. You don't need to go necessarily any further than that in the Electricity Tree. But honestly speaking, if I had the choice of going through Dominion of Command and Dominion of Aether, I would probably actually rather get the Neuroelectric Disruptors, because I think that's a little bit more powerful. For units, there's not a ton of things that I would say I would be hugely happy getting. Even things like the Psi-Tank, the Subjugator, and the Zenith. Those things I just don't think that they're cost effective for what they do. And I think there's better options in sort of spamming out things like Star Guides and Lightbringers and Ascended Teachers. There are things that you could potentially do with the Mirage in this case, but I don't think they're really as necessary, especially because you don't need the Hallucination Projector. It's completely useless in this case. Enforcers are actually pretty good here, or Guild Assassins rather. Enforcers are also pretty good. But the Guild Assassin is actually quite nice because they gain a lot of benefits from that Tenets of Tranquility. Because you're going to want that stagger resistance. They're going to be far enough back that you're probably not going to be using the Shield of Remorse a ton with them. And 200 morale on the Guild Assassins is actually really quite nice. So anyway, let's take a look at some of our army stacks here. Up here we've got just a stack with a hero and then 3 Star Guides, as well as 2 of these Lightbringers. This is a fairly unbalanced army, but I'm actually trying to merge them up with some of the armies that are down here, which are also a little bit unbalanced. So that's for sort of a reason. We've got an extra Lightbringer over here. Down here we do have access to 2 Ascended Teachers, which is absolutely crazy. A Star Guide, a Lightbringer, and an unupgraded Indentured. I didn't actually bother upgrading my core units other than the Guild Assassins in this case, although I really should have. I just kept running out of Cosmite. Over here, another Ascended Teacher, another Star Guide, 2 more Lightbringers, and a Liquid Crystal. You're going to see that I'm not using as many of these sort of monstrous type creatures because I've not been buying them, because I've been saving those influence points on Ascended Teachers, just because they're so much more powerful than anything I could get from anyone else, really. We have got some other armies lying around here. We got this one over here. This one's actually got our Guild Assassins, and we can take a look at what they've got here. They've got the targeting system as well as the vision enhancers, and this is the standard with a Guild Assassin, which makes them really accurate and really deadly. And then the Tenets of Tranquility. Even if I've got access to other forms of stagger resistance, since these guys aren't enlightened from anything else, this is actually the best stagger resistance that you can get on these particular guys here. So I would definitely recommend getting that on these fellows. In addition to that, we've got access to, I think, another stack somewhere, but it's pretty similar to what we've sort of seen already. We've got, I think, 2 more stacks, actually, if I can find them. All right, so over here we got access to, again, 2 Ascended Teachers, Serpian and another Lightbringer. And over here we've got access to another Ascended Teacher, 2 more Star Guides, and this Mega Sow. So that's kind of what we've been building here, and yeah, like, just spamming out Ascended Teachers is powerful in its own right, but being able to sort of force your way forward with fairly eclectic mixes of troops, just because everything is so powerful, and even without support, but even more so with support, just makes it so that you can do a lot of damage with fairly crazy sort of builds there. So yeah, if we take a look at what we have got for our unit builds as well, I don't think I've gone through that. Our Ascended Teachers here, I do want to kind of go through slightly different ones that I've got here, but they're kind of bugged out right now, so I'm kind of worried about trying to switch them up too badly. What these guys have got here is the Shield of Remorse, just in case I need to get in close there to do some stuff, especially the Celestial Wrath is kind of not the longest range thing. Mantra of Clarity, that's actually a pretty good one, especially if you just pop a Celestial Wrath down on a bunch of enemies there. This can really sort of wreck a bunch of people's day, make them a lot easier to target, and then you can sort of sweep them up with Mantra of Clarity. Psi-Tech Vision Enhancers just makes it more accurate. So, pretty basic build here. You could use Focus Flames if you're worried about that kind of thing. I'm not in this particular case there. I could add in something like the Shield of Reckoning if I'm a little bit more worried about dealing damage to people attacking, but I think that the Psi-Tech Vision Enhancer is not the worst thing in the world. It's 2 shields for fairly cheap. There's not really too many more expensive modules that are capable of giving him more defenses, so realistically speaking, like, the Shield of Reckoning is the only one that's substantially better, and it's a lot more expensive. So if we go down, we can also see our Guild Assassins here. As I mentioned, they've got that sort of build. Got some monsters and stuff like that. I'm not going to talk about them because just equip them with whatever you think is best at the time. You're never going to have like the same monsters twice, really. For our Lightbringers, that Arc Retaliation defense, that makes them really annoying to deal with. Shield of Remorse, and unfortunately the Tenets of Tranquility. Now, if I was playing optimally instead of doing it for the Guide series, I would have researched another type of thing. The reason that I'm not here is simply because you never know. There might be a game where you don't have access to Vanguard or Amazons. In this particular case, I could have gone into the Amazons here, and I could have researched Grounding Harness, which would have given me stagger resistance +2 shock resistance and give them a point of armor. That would have been stronger than the tenants that they've got on there, obviously. The reason I didn't, of course, if you don't have access to those, then you won't be able to get them. If you do have access to those, then of course you absolutely should get that instead of what I've done here. So that is the only kind of waste there. It is the kind of big thing that I dislike there. Over here we've got our Psi-Scout Star Guides. Psi-Tech Vision Enhancers, we've got the Mantra of Clarity as well as the Shield of Remorse. What I would like to do in this particular case is replace the Psi-Tech Vision Enhancers with the Mantra of Life. But again, I'm running out of Cosmite, so quite often I don't have the ability to sort of switch these out there. But this is the stronger build in my opinion. The ability to add Celestial Guidance to a unit, heal them for 15, and 2 shields makes them tougher, is a great sort of save there. Then you use Cleansing Light on another unit the next turn, and they're just healed for a humongous amount there. Very, very powerful effects. So I definitely think that there's a lot of good into that. And they'll be gaining the benefit of Mantra of Clarity there for the plus, making them harder to hit. So just ridiculously sort of durable units that are being helped by these guys. If you're going for the more sort of offense-orientated angle where you're using Deceiving Light there, obviously you don't need the Mantra of Life there. If you're focusing on marking units with the Mantra of Clarity and stuff like that, you're probably going to want to use the Exploitative Targeting System would be a really, really powerful one there. Or you could be using something like, say, the Tenets of Pacifism in that particular instance, because you get in close enough to use the Deceiving Light there. Next turn you can use Tenets of Pacifism while they're still putzing around and they're sort of deceived. So that is another way that you can build these guys. Anyway, I think that's all the units actually that I was upgrading. I forgot to upgrade my Indentured because I kept running out of resources to upgrade them with, but if I was going to upgrade these particular guys, I would go for that Shield of Reckoning in this particular case. I would probably just throw on something like, say, the Exploitative Targeting System and the Psi-Tech Vision Enhancers. It just makes them more deadly without costing very much. But yeah, I kept running out of I just kept running out of Cosmite, and I had better things to upgrade in this particular case. Don't do what I did and not upgrade them, though, because having more Enlightened units in your armies does mean that you're gaining more benefits on your Enlightened teachers, although, again, that really didn't matter in this particular case. So, anyhow, that is going to be our video for today. I do think that this is not necessarily the strongest of combinations. The reason is that it's fairly late game. There were a couple times where I did okay in the early game, but I've never had an instance where it's like the stuff I got early on without upgrades and stuff like that was doing a dominating job there. It's always been stuff in the early game struggles a little bit against whatever I'm fighting against, and I gradually overtake them as I turtle and then burst onto the scene and immediately kill everything once I get access to sort of later game stuff. That's kind of how I feel Celestials work. So if that's your sort of playstyle, I think that that's going to be sort of more fun for you. But struggling and fighting things early game with the Lightbringers has been a lot of fun as well, just because it's a really interesting unit to try and play around and sort of use. So anyway, that's going to be our video for today. I am going to be doing, of course, other Syndicate factions and secret tech combinations, but I might not do all of them for all of the factions, because there are certain secret technologies that are really just not that interesting when combined with certain things. For example, it's very unlikely I'm going to bother doing Devar Xenoplague, because Xenoplague is already pretty boring, and there's not a ton of synergy in there with the Devar, for example. Or I could talk about, say, the Heriter and Anything, because Heriter Anything plays pretty similarly no matter what you're doing. Heriter is always sort of about that. You get some really, really powerful units and have them sort of running around massacring everything and having the little followers sort of boosting them up there. And that works really, really well with Heriter. And then you have Essence Blast, and that's all you really need to dominate with Heriter. They're really powerful, and they're kind of not really that interesting in the sense that they don't mesh with whatever faction you're sort of using them with. So because of that, we're probably not going to do every faction with Heriter, and we're probably not going to do necessarily all the Xenoplague, just because they also don't have very much sort of synergy with the factions. Like, the units are always the same, and they're limited in what sort of modifications they can have in them. But yeah, that's going to be sort of how we have to do this. So anyhow, hope you found this episode enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.